Live from the Washington, D.C. area, it's the Inside Scoop. All the news that our viewers want to know. Now, here's the host.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Deborah A. Woolen, and I'm your host this evening for Inside Scoop. So, diversity, equity, and inclusion. You have heard it on television. You have heard it in HR. You've probably heard it in your children's schools or PTSA meetings. What is it? Where we are going to examine the concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion with a professional, one of the foremost voices here in Washington, D.C., Dr. Rochelle Thompson. Dr. Thompson, thank you so much for joining us.
Yes, thank you, Deborah. I'm super excited to be here and to be able to talk about some of these cool topics today. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so before we get into exactly what diversity, equity, and inclusion is, and we're also going to talk about your personal project, your passion project,
yes,
the Black Voice Project. Let's tell everyone about your background.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just let you go.
All right. Well, I am an HR professional by trade. I am certified in diversity, equity, and inclusion. I also happen to be a licensed clinical psychologist. I have my doctorate in psychology. I am also a mother, a proud mother of four, a founder and CEO of the Black Voice Project and RM Thompson & Co., which is a mental health counseling and consulting practice.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what made you go in the direction of, I think diversity, equity, and inclusion is such a broad topic. So psychology, like what drivers or what, indicators in life sent you in this direction?
I think it was really my upbringing. I grew up in areas where there were so many people who didn't have a voice. And I was very confused why the people who didn't have a voice were always okay with that. And it was because they didn't have any spaces to be empowered. But when I looked into, going back to history, I found that people of color weren't always like that. We actually had spaces where we could speak up for ourselves, and we had the same thing as our counterparts. And so a lot of the work that I do today is really about not just race or racial equity, but it's about bridging the gap to be able to create spaces where everybody has a seat at the table. And I think that's why I got into my profession.
Absolutely. And it's so important. It's a conversation that we all need to have. Nowadays, we're having it more. I think we can agree that George Floyd, or 2020, was the year where we purposely started to have these conversations about the importance of diversity, about the importance of acknowledging that we're different, and there are two different Americas, maybe three or four.
Yeah.
But I think we also can't ignore the backlash that DEI faces. So let's talk about what diversity, equity, and inclusion is and what it is not.
Yes, let's get into it. I'll start with what I call it DE&I, what it's not. All right, it's not a space for us to tokenize people of color. Number one, it's not a space where we only talk about, again, race. It's not a space where we are intentionally excluding people, and it's not a space where we get to call people names, right? That's what it's not. But what it is, it's a host of perspectives that we get to bring from all different walks of life. When we think about what we call America, or we think about New York, for example, we call that the mixing pot. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is that. It's the mixing pot of perspectives, experience, age, race, gender, lifestyles, and bringing them to the table to come up with collaboration and innovation in the workplaces that we are, in our neighborhoods, our communities, all over. And so that's some of the big pieces that people tend to miss. They get really triggered emotionally about the word diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially those that are in power. Because it's not about the space of making you feel bad for having your power. It's saying that if you could just see me for who I am and understand my experiences and allow me to bring my perspectives to the table, then maybe we can all get something done and get accomplished. So that's what I think it is and what it is not.
So we've all heard the melting pot analogy. I remember I was in 5th grade, eons and eons ago, and my social studies teacher, Miss Dunn from Featherstone, if you're watching
Shout out.
I remember you. But she asked us if we thought that America was a tossed salad or a melting pot.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting how I knew, like at 9, 10 years old, that I didn't feel a part of my community. I think with the concept of a tossed salad, yes, everyone's mixed together, but everyone still maintains their same, the tomato's still the tomato,
Yep.
the lettuce is still the lettuce, the cucumber's still the cucumber, but we are mixed together. But with a melting pot perspective, you lose some of yourself in order to make the one.
Yeah.
So do you think there's a fear in people when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, people feeling like their identity is going to be lost?
Absolutely. I would definitely say that, because DE&I starts with reflection. So it's self-reflection at that. And that goes for anybody on the spectrum. So you have to realize where you are, and then you have to meet people where they're at the same time. And so a lot of us, when we hold power, for example, that power is tied to a certain identity. And if I feel like I have to give something away of myself that may be that power to someone else, I'm going to lose my existence or who I am. And that's not what that is. It's really about saying, everybody should have an opportunity to have the same opportunities that I have. And I'm okay. There's enough food at the table for us all to get there. I don't have to lose who I am just for you to gain something or to learn more about who you are. So it's not a give or take in that way. And so again, it's a big myth, miseducation, but people often do associate their identity being lost with the terms of practicing diversity, equity, and inclusion, but it's really not that.
Have you found that it's challenging to introduce the concept to people in power, introduce the concept of incorporating DEI into the corporate space?
Yes, it's very challenging. So from the psychology perspective, there's this thing called cognitive dissonance. And so what that means is that I may say that I am a very good person, right? But in my mind, I might treat somebody differently. And so if you're telling me that, it just goes against my principles and I'm out of alignment at that point. And so oftentimes when I have conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion in certain environments, especially professional ones, we look at the data first. And in that data may say, marginalized groups don't feel like they're welcomed or accepted here. That data may say our pay gaps are too far wide. Women are not making as much money as men. And immediately when you start looking at that data, people might take a little bit of offense. Like, why are we even we don't even need to do this work, because before this, there were no issues. Nobody ever said that to us out loud, right? And so of course there's a little bit of pushback in the beginning, because it's really hard, because again, I think leaders of organizations, I think they are good people. I think they try to do good things. They want to practice that. But when you see it on paper, it's a whole different piece of pie to try to eat.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think that's such a good point, because people want to be allies, right?
Yes.
That's the new buzzword going around, that people in power want to be, or people in a position of privilege, they want to be allies. But I think it's important, and I want us to talk about right now what allyship is and what it is not. I'll tell you a quick story. Okay. So it was a couple years ago, there were two black women that were vying for the same political seat. And it would have been historic in Virginia. And I was invited to a viewing party of a debate that was pre-recorded. So I'm there. There are two black women running for the same political seat in Virginia. Just the history of Virginia and black women, it's just so it's chock full of just of oppression, essentially. So this political seat was very, very important. So I was there. I was at this watch party, and of one of the candidates who was a black woman, there was a white woman there who was supporting her. And so we're watching her opponent, again a black woman, on television, and her opponent answers a question. And this white woman lets out this laugh, this mocking laugh of, ha, 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 yeah, right. And it was so, I was offended. Yes, I was there for that. I was there for that candidate, but I understood at that moment that she didn't understand that she wasn't only laughing at an opponent. To me, she was laughing at all black women, because each opponent represented all black women, two black women in this state. So maybe in her mind, she really thought that she was being an ally, but she wasn't. I tell people that being an ally to a group is not finding your favorite one and supporting them. Being an ally is being an ally to the whole group. So let's talk about what allyship is and what it is not.
Yes. It is not being the savior. So I'll start with that. You don't have to come in and think that you're going to save the world, but it really is a partnership where you get to, with a person that has the leverage, the person that has the privilege, the most privilege in that situation, has the opportunity to say, I want to extend an olive branch to bring you over on my side. It's exactly what we're doing here today. You, in this situation, you have the leverage because you have the platform, and you're an ally to me because you said, I want to extend this platform to you to be able to help you with your message and to be able to talk about some of these issues that are important to the community. And so essentially that's what that looks like in our work environment, or that's what it should look like in our work environment or in a political landscape. We should be able to say, if I have the most leverage, if I have the most experience, if I have the most power in this particular situation, how can I use that in a way that's socially responsible? And how can I use that in a way that's making sure that I close the gaps between any disparities that are happening in the communities that I'm serving?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I remember, and it doesn't always, I'm bringing this example up, that it doesn't always have to be a race issue.
Yep.
There was a team member of mine professionally. I don't do this for a living, everyone. There's a team member of mine who has a speech impediment.
Yeah.
And I really appreciated how we had a one-on-one conversation, and he expressed frustration at a team member that constantly cut him off and didn't let him finish his sentences. And he stepped me through how easy it might be for me to translate my thoughts to words, but just the extra processes that he has to go through in order to communicate. And so because of that, I was able to communicate to the rest of the team, okay, this is how we need to communicate with each other.
Yes.
And I was grateful for the opportunity to be an advocate for him. So being an ally doesn't always have to be about race.
Yes.
It really is, like you said, extending an olive branch to another group.
Absolutely. I've had similar situations in the work environment happen where they think that the loudest person in the room is probably the more smartest, but that's not always the case. Sometimes it's just really you being in control of that meeting setting, and you see that the voice that's the most quietest, that isn't saying anything, you're just commenting and saying, hey, so-and-so, you know, we haven't heard from you yet. I'd love to get your voice and get you to be a part of that conversation. That sometimes can make all the difference between whether or not someone succeeds or they don't succeed, because otherwise the interpretation would be that this particular person who is the quietest in the room, oh, they're not adding any value. But that's not necessarily the case, right? And so allyship is about recognizing that.
Absolutely. This is such a great conversation. I cannot wait to continue it. So please make sure you come back and join us as I continue my conversation with Dr. Rochelle Thompson about diversity, equity, and inclusion and the Black Voice Project. We'll see you soon. Stay right there.
So, I just moved in with this family, and it's embarrassing. The little one, he likes to go outside and crawl around in the giant litter box. I don't know what he's doing. I mean, I was born and I knew how to use the litter box. Look at that. That's disgusting. Oh, poop already. You're making me nervous. Oh, okay, I can't look at this anymore. I really hope he grows out of this, for his sake.
So how was work?
It was 1,300 hours. My math class from 302 was in the trenches. Davy Roth had it the worst. Fractions were coming at him left and right. He just didn't get the damn things. 2 days ago, I tried to teach him what 1/4 of 1/2 was using different sizes of blocks. Yesterday, I tried again by dividing up pizza. Both missions failed.
Oh, no.
But today, I was ready. I created a combat math game where the only way to beat the enemy is to out-fraction them. Davy conquered every last denominator. My game was so successful, the principal is deploying it to math squadrons all over the school. Anywho, how was your day?
Oh, today my boss treated the office to salad wraps.
Salad wraps.
I know.
150 over 90.
180 over 111.
160 over 110. I had a stroke.
This is what high blood pressure looks like. You might not feel its symptoms, but the results from a stroke are far from invisible or silent. If you've come off your treatment plan, get back on it or talk with your doctor to create an exercise, diet, and medication plan that works for you. Go to loweryourhbp.org.
If I would have followed a treatment plan, I would not be in this situation.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Thank you so much for joining us back on Inside Scoop as we continue our conversation with Dr. Rochelle Thompson. In the last segment, we talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion, what it is not, the same thing with allyship. And so now, Dr. Thompson, let's get into policy.
Let's get into policy. I was waiting for this.
Yes, because so we've got issues like Ron of Florida. I'm not even going to say his last name because I just don't think he deserves it. But just stoking fear around critical race theory and the 1619 Project and wokeness. There's one thing to have an issue with these perspectives and with these schools of thought, but it's another thing to spend taxpayer dollars paying your other fellow legislators to pen legislation against these things. That is where we have the problem. So, but how do we even get to the place where we are creating policy against people's identities and lived experiences?
Florida is known to be a conservative state. Florida changes the way an election can go for people. So I understand why he's taking this approach. However, I never underestimate the power of somebody that's willing to start war with Mickey Mouse or Disneyland, okay?
Right.
All right. But he didn't put himself in that seat. He was elected. He was chosen. And when we look at some of the voting data here, in terms of how he got that particular seat, we're going to find 71% of men and women that were older and white voted for him. And then we found that there was such a decline in the African American vote there, and we found that it was a decline in the youth vote. So what it tells me is, or paints a picture of, how disengaged people are that have the most power. And so that's how we get policies like what Ron is doing. He's getting policies based off of the support that he has and the loudest voices in the room. They're very comfortable with what he's doing. They're very comfortable and okay with it. However, again, it's a violation of the 14th Amendment. We're violating people's rights, and we're overtly racially discriminating. I will say this, he's racially discriminating with a smile though, and very polite about it at the end of the day. And so that's why people think it's acceptable for some of this to happen. It's like, oh, Florida is where woke people come to die. That's what he said. And he said it with a smile, okay, when he was on his platform. And then we had the NAACP just recently come out and issue a travel advisory saying, hey, you shouldn't come. And what's interesting about that is Washington, D.C. is getting ready to do a D.C. Miami takeover. And so I don't think people of color really care about the NAACP ban. So this is the bigger point into the issue. Sometimes our silence is complicity. And we have the power with our voices, we have the power with our vote to begin to make people realize that they need to take discrimination seriously. And so what I'd like to see happen is the same way that we responded in matters of George Floyd or Trayvon Martin, that's the way that we need to respond here, especially with this upcoming presidential election.
Just from your background and your perspective, so Florida is known to be a conservative state. But they've got some kind of mixing bowl areas. I think of Miami, for example.
They do.
But I don't want to happen, let's just say Northern Virginia, because everyone knows that Northern Virginia is very different from the rest of Virginia. I'm sorry. I don't want to happen to Virginia what has happened or what is happening in Florida.
Yeah.
So what can we say to people when it comes to just being aware or what to look for when it comes to policies around diversity, equity, and inclusion?
This is going to be really important because we talk about curriculum in schools, and we are seeing right now where the AP African American history was banned in all of the schools in Florida, and there was some issues going on with the circuit court saying, well, you can't really do that. So how do we avoid that happening? It's really about our community getting involved with our schools. I could go out to a certain event, a concert. The Beyonce concert's gonna be full. It's gonna be live and livid. But then when I go to the PTA meetings, I may see 2 or 3 people in there. And so I wonder why that is, that we'll invest more money into paying for tickets to a Taylor Swift concert or to a Beyonce concert before we go for free to certain community meetings. And so it's time for us to do a little bit more civic engagement. And once we stay in tune with that, we can actually hear what's going on and getting tied to organizations such as the NAACP, or getting connected. And it's also about having a good group of friends with different perspectives as well. I have friends that are devout Republicans, and I love having conversations with them because we keep each other on our toes, but then I can understand what's going on that I may not necessarily be paying attention to in the Republican land. And you know, it doesn't hurt every once in a blue moon to look at CNN or C-SPAN so you can actually see what's going on. But getting connected with whoever your local politician is really important. Getting connected with your local school organization so you can hear what's going on and what they're talking about is really important. And getting engaged with your community is we have that responsibility where we live at to make sure that people that are coming in, changing legislation and policy, they're not doing it without our permission.
So where are the blind spots in policy? Do we not have the right people at the table? Are we not doing enough research? Are we not electing the right people? Or if we are electing the right people, do we just not have the right advisors around them? Like, what are the blind spots?
I'll tell you the truth. A lot of voting has a lot to do with psychology. And so it is a very emotionalized process. So it's just like what we saw in the last recent election when Donald Trump ran. A lot of that ran on emotions, okay? And so the media has the loudest voice. And so whoever has the most money gets to be able to have the loudest space and the loudest voice in the media. So we have to be mindful of that. Also, you have to have money to run, to be a politician. That's really important, or you're not really going to get too far. So it is investing. When you're investing into your money, we are vetting the candidate, not by how attractive they are, because that is one of the things, the measurements that they look at, how attractive they are, whether somebody is married or not, what makes you attractive to people, right? And if you get your 15 seconds of fame, all you need to do is have a really good soundbite to speak on the latest issues, and people are going to swing that way. And so we have to be a little bit more intelligent about how we make our votes, not solely on emotion, not solely on, okay, because this person said something in the moment that felt good to me, but actually going on the website and looking at their policy issues, going out and going to the meet and greets and meeting the candidate, getting to know the person that you're getting ready to put in this seat, and setting up, having a loud enough voice to set up an accountability piece, that if they do create policies that are not, or to the contrary of what it is that the community needs to see, that we have to get them out of that seat that particular year. We have the leverage and power to do that. Most politicians are just hoping that you don't know.
Yeah. So you were talking about appearance, and Nadia Brown, who is an instructor at Georgetown, she has a book, oh my gosh, it's called Sister Style, and she talks about how the appearance of Black women who are candidates kind of predicts how people are going, or if people vote for them, if she has a natural, if she's light-skinned, if she's dark-skinned, if she's married, if she's single. So I wanted to make sure I did a shout out for Dr. Nadia Brown of Georgetown University. But also just talking about people's lived experiences and how people's lived experiences, they are in direct relationship with democracy. And I think what's happening is that we have people making decisions, creating policies for people, but their life does not match their lived experiences. If you do not have a uterus, then you should not, be the last voice when it comes to reproductive rights. And sometimes if you do have a uterus, I mean, every uterus is different, right? So I just think that that's just something else that we need to take into consideration. I was talking to someone earlier, and she was asking, like, hey, how do we diversify local political spaces? It's like, recruit in the jails. Just because someone is imprisoned doesn't mean they're a bad person. As I told her, might have been one bad boyfriend.
You never lie.
Exactly. So I just think that's so important to your point of just making sure that we have the right people at the table.
Yes, all of the voices matter, and it's that self-reflective process again. Understanding that even though I have this power to be able to change things doesn't mean that I have to do it on my own. Before I go into women's issues, I need to make sure that I get input from women that are around me. But that's what we see. During political years, we see the candidates more than we'll ever see them. After they get their seat, they disappear, they start making decisions that in theory may sound good, but in practice, they have no way of really working. And then after they've done that for 2 to 4 years, then we'll see them again. And then they kind of give us an update on what's new in the streets. And so again, holding our politicians accountable is going to be the key to our success in this upcoming 2024 election cycle. So I really like to see that. But again, like you mentioned, having people at the table, this is a call for all the politicians out here. If you are running for a position, go into your community organizations and invite everybody to the table before you pass legislation. It's really important that you're hearing from the people that have hired you to do your job. And so that is going to be like my takeaway today as far as that, because I need to do a better job as well. You know, if I'm preaching to the choir, I need to do a better job of making sure that I go to the communities in which I'm working with and get them just as excited about policy and voting as much as I do about some of the other community issues. But we're dealing with one step at a time. But that's the work essentially that the Black Voice Project does, is we create, we uplift, and we amplify. And so, again, I think now you've added something to my agenda to do to make sure this upcoming year I rally, and the same youth that we're mentoring is going to be the same youth that go out and to hit the streets and talk about voting and the voting issues in D.C.
I'm so glad you brought up the Black Voice Project. That's a perfect segue to talk about it. I know that one component is mental health. We can't talk about democracy. We cannot talk about politics. I mean, people are constantly questioning the mental capacity of elected officials on television. But let's unpack that a bit, mental health. What the Black Voice Project does in that vein. But when we were talking earlier in preparation for this discussion, we talked about mental health post-pandemic. Were we prepared for how COVID was going to affect the U.S. population mentally?
You know, in the words of like my grandma, we treated mental health like a red-headed stepchild, is what she would say. It was almost the last thing that we thought about in terms of the holistic approach of what was happening in the world. The entire world took a shift in the regular routine, in your identity. When you woke up in the morning, you wore a suit to go to work, and then you stopped going to work. And then after you stopped going to work, you stopped going to work, and then you invited the world in your home by way of your job because you had to work remotely. And now we get to see who you really are. We get to see your kids, we get to see your issues, and that changes the game. And also for our kids, we saw a huge shift because they were once going into school, then they had to stop. And kids have the same amount of level of stress that we have, but imagining what that looked like for them, that process, I mean, it's detrimental. But I hope we can talk a little bit more about that.
Yes, we will. So in our next segment, we're going to get into that exactly. I just think that I don't think there's any way that we could fathom what the world would have been like after COVID. Please make sure you come back and join us as we continue our conversation with Dr. Rochelle Thompson on DEI and the Black Voice Project. We'll see you soon.
Caitlin, be serious. Now take the oath. Come on. I'm totally taking this seriously. Okay, I'm ready. You may begin. I pledge that I will never meet in person with anyone I first met online without checking with my parent or guardian. And furthermore, if my parent or guardian agrees to the meeting, it will be in a public place and my parent or guardian must come along. Do you pinky swear? I do.
When you teach your kids about internet safety, they'll pass it on. For more information, go to cableclicksmart.org.
Dare to load their minds. Dare to explore. Dare to STEM. Learn more at She Can STEM.
You're not the kind of guy that makes the girls all sigh.
2 for $3.
They never turn their heads and look when you walk by. 'Cause it's the little things.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
helping.
What a nice young man.
Pass it on.
My goodness.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
I better get out of here. Hurry.
Get it.
Get it. Get it.
Give your town a reason to celebrate, because every Goodwill item you bring home brings job training and more to your community. Goodwill, bring good home.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
And thank you so much for joining us back here on Inside Scoop as we continue our conversation with Dr. Rochelle Thompson. So in the previous segment, we ended by talking about COVID and its impact on the U.S. There's no way that we could have predicted how just all of the impacts, but one area specifically is our youth.
Yes, yes. That's a big focus for me right now. And again, when we think about what COVID did and how it changed everything from being a kid, and we think about this in the perspective from the mind of an adolescent, you know, if you live in a household with a parent that is stressed out financially, or a single parent household, and or an abusive household, and or a household where you're neglected, generally speaking, that's not going to really work for you if you have to go to school in that exact same household, right? And there are some parents that I know that actually send their kids to school just to get a break. So I can only imagine the type of stressors that were put onto kids to try to adjust their routine. And it put them further away from being able to humanize one another. And so what we're seeing now, and I think social media also created this environment in which people can dehumanize from real issues. We can see things in comments now where if someone is getting murdered or whatever is on social media, you'll see people actually like laughing about that, you know, and so that's what I mean when I say that COVID-19, social media separating reality from, you know, like I guess this fake world, if you will, this remote environment, did a hard thing for our youth primarily. And so what we saw was an uptick of car theft. We saw an uptick of violent crime. We saw an uptick in arrest in juveniles. And so that to me says that, you know, we're creating some issues and no one's talking about. And I don't think that the answer to those issues is more police, because that tends to be the answer now. I do think it's, again, that mental health component to bring people back to reality and say, hey, it's really not okay to do things like that. What are you really angry at? What are you really depressed at? Do you even know what that is, or how can you recognize that? And so those are things we didn't really talk about too much when the pandemic hit.
Right. And so the Black Voice Project, your project that your passion project that you created, let's talk about that and how that that's helping within the community when it comes to youth and adults.
Yeah, you know, growing up, I'm a byproduct of DC public schools. I loved DC public schools and that it was a great community. But I would be remiss if I didn't tell the truth or the realities of what it was like going into a school that had metal detectors. Or if I didn't talk about the experience of the person on the left or the right of me, they may have had a weapon that came into school because they needed it for their own protection because they were going into a neighborhood that was unsafe. Or the friends that I had that actually came from group homes but had to go back to those group homes. They didn't have that same opportunity. Or for myself, where I was going to my grandmother's house and she lived in a housing projects, and we literally normalized how to step over people who were addicts and on drugs and go into your unit and you mind your business. That's literally the landscape of the world. And I just did not think that that was normal. And then as I got older, I realized that some of those same kids, they either died or they're in jail. They didn't make it. They didn't have an opportunity the same way that I did. No one saw them the same way that I did. And so the Black Voice Project is committed to making sure that I see you. Wherever you are, the level that you are, I'm going to see you, and I'm going to take your hand if you take it with me, and we're going to go to the places that we need to go, so that way you don't have to live in that same trauma, you don't have to live in those lived experience, but you have exposure to something different. And so a lot of the work that we do, from housing, from mental health, from our returning citizens program, a lot of the work that's on the ground is enabling people to be able to see a different life for themselves than they would have normally seen.
Yes. So on your website, which is www.theblackvoiceproject.com,
yes,
you list three areas of projects. You have reentry and juvenile intervention support, school music and engagement, and education and outreach. So can you kind of like outline each one of those, starting with reentry?
Yes, so every Saturday at 10 a.m. we are in Southeast DC, and we are partnering with organizations called MORCA that they work with the government, DC government. And so shout out to Mayor Bowser for that particular funding that they've given to them to be able to enable and help us. And my father, who happens to be the vice president, but also runs the program for returning citizens, is a great steward of success of what this looks like. We come into the community and we say, you may have done a bad thing, right, that caused you to get locked up, but that doesn't mean that you're a bad person. And when you come out of a place of incarceration, you don't have to go back to what you were doing that got you in there in the first place. And a lot of times people do that because of self-worth issues. I don't believe that I'm even worthy enough to be out here, or the stressors of life in and of itself. I'd rather go back to jail than to have to deal with that. So the reentry system gives people that support, and it gives people that exposure that says, no, you are worth something, and we're not going to let people make you feel bad for having made your mistake. We're going to work with you. We're going to coach you. We're going to train you, we're going to mentor you, and then we're going to put you back out on the community, and you're going to turn lives around for the youth in that process. You can become an entrepreneur. We've had several entrepreneurs start their own businesses who came home and are doing very successful. We've also hired returning citizens to be peer mentors in our program, and that enables them to walk the line of doing what's right because they're representing our program, and they get to go back out into the community and help people see, like, you can be an example just like us. You can do good work here. So that's that program. The school engagement and school music. Creative arts has completely disappeared almost in and of itself in some of our school programs, right? Because of funding issues. So when we start to prioritize and how schools get funding, your test scores, how are kids tested? Normally they're tested in math, science, those reading, literature. However, those paths aren't for everybody, right? Yeah. And so what we do is we go into the schools and we say, look, if you have a creative mind, that's okay. Like, let me teach you how to do this in a way that you can actually make something of yourself, right? And so I want to shout out to my cousin Raymond, who is the leader of that program, has gone into H.D. Woodson, teaching kids how to play instruments, starting a band, you know, teaching them the fundamentals of that. And we partner with local rec centers to be able to help them with, you know, studio time. So if you want to be able to edit your own music, here's how you can do that, you know. And so I find that that creative music or that creative like arts, that helps kids to be able to, it's therapeutic. It's really therapeutic.
Absolutely.
And it helps them get away from things, but it also shows them again that they can make something of themselves outside of jumping high or running fast.
That's right.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to highlight that your organization is based in DC, and so some people might be saying, well, you know, well, Deborah, this is Fairfax County public access. Like, why are we talking about DC? If you live in Fairfax County, you either work in DC or play in DC.
Yes.
You do business in DC somehow. So when you drive into DC and you see someone on the street, or you see someone panhandling, or just you're driving or just interacting with the citizens, like the the DMV area, it's one big mixing bowl. We talked about that earlier.
Yes.
So we absolutely should care and support these initiatives. So you talked about reentry. How about education and outreach?
Yeah, so a lot of what we're talking about in terms of education is vocational stuff. So what we're looking at is, how do we teach our youth to be able to take workforce development, those hard like vocational skills, and make something of themselves in a way that's productive and that feels natural to them. So the HVAC work, the carpentry work, you know, we still need that. And, you know, we need engineers, we need people that are hands-on, and you don't necessarily need a degree to change the world. And I'll say that until I can't say it anymore. And then also there's a perspective of health education too, because if we look at what the health data says right now, the top 5 reasons of the top 5 reasons that people of color, or for those that are seniors that are passing away, typically that's going to be your cancers, that's going to be your diabetes, that's going to be your heart disease, that's going to be homicide. Those are the reasons, suicide, those are the top reasons that people are no longer here. And so we're here to educate. Why is that, right? So we look at these systemic issues. Poor diet is the number one, that reason. So we educate you on that. Also, if you live in poverty, it's really difficult to be able to eat healthy. So how do we get you into a place where you can be financially developed and safe, so that way you can make better decisions?
That's right.
Also, so you know what to eat and how to eat better, right? Working out, physical exercise. So we're educating you on that. I have a person in my program, his name is Napoleon. I love him. He is doing a workout class for our seniors and wants to continue to do programs like that to help them continue to have that mobility, so that they're not losing themselves, because we all know, we hear this a lot. When you get retired, it's like, oh my goodness, I'm gonna slow down and I'm gonna stop. But that's not necessarily the case. You still have value even at that age. So HIV is another area, and STDs. So those are conversations that are really tough, but we're committed to the outreach and education of that. Substance abuse as well. So we have to have classes and conversations around, why do we practice the use of drugs? Where does that come from, right? But it's not just teaching you something, right? It's just going in, it's not just attacking the symptom of the problem. It's saying, like, I understand life for you may be overwhelming. Here's a total approach on how we can help you with that. And so that's the education and outreach work that we did. When it was COVID-19, we went out, we passed out masks, we went out and educated people on the shots, we went out and educated people on how to get some of the safety materials that you may need, gloves. We were out there in the community making sure that people were aware and educated of what happened. And we're allied to the government because, again, we're here. We're in the community every single day.
That's right. And so the Black Voice Project was recently on NBC4.
Yes.
What was that about?
We're really committed to some of the challenges that are happening right now around violence. And you make a good point about me being here today at Fairfax Public Access. So DC crime challenges are Maryland crime challenges and are Virginia crime challenges. And so as we continue to see DC being more gentrified, we're starting to see, again, the crime waves go in certain areas, right? But also we're looking at, how do we address what's going on with our youth? Because those are the ones that are experiencing the most propensity to have these lashes of violence, right? Thinking it's a video game when you're shooting, people in the street. And so the work that we're committed to doing right now is working with programs and the youth. For example, we have Martha's Vineyard that we're working with. We work with other nonprofits. Miss Tutt, she works over in Highland, and she works with the youth as well. And so we're committed to working with organizations like that to talk to the youth, but not only talk to them, but provide them, again, with opportunities, vocational opportunities. We're doing Teens for Jobs. We're launching that, where we're going to pay minimum wage to our teens to go through this program to keep them off the street and give them some vocational skills along the way for those that are interested. We do youth hangouts at Anacostia Library. That's another thing that we're doing right now. Again, it's a holistic approach. It may not necessarily be all the time bringing in police to come in and say, we're going to police the neighborhood. Maybe if we go and we reach one to teach one. If we did that, we can make a change. That's what the Black Voice Project is doing, and that's why we were on NBC4.
Wow, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So when we come back, we're going to talk a bit more about the Black Voice Project and your upcoming initiatives. So please make sure you join us. Don't go anywhere. We've got one more segment left with Dr. Rochelle Thompson. I know you've been enjoying the whole thing, so stay right with us. Don't go anywhere, and we'll see you back.
I can't believe we broke Old Man Hennessy's window.
Correction, dude. You broke. I just threw the ball.
This is really bad. What are we gonna do?
We? Go to the door, ask for the ball back.
Are you serious?
It's my ball, Myrtleback.
You're so dead.
I'd run away.
Yeah, to Uruguay.
Kiss your life goodbye. Sorry.
Let's go.
See you, dude.
See ya. Remember me and your well.
Nice one. Some friends you are.
Keep smiling, keep shining.
Hi. was an accident. And we can fix the window. Come on. I'll come with you.
Loyalty. Pass it on.
You go first.
A message from the Foundation for a Better Life.
One day these rats were playing in the woods. Well, it's some matches and that's no good. Listen to smoke before you give it a try. Only you. Don't play with matches. Don't play with fire. Cause there's nothing very funny about pretty top light. Nothing very nice on a homeless mind. So if a gorgeous force is what you desire, don't play with matches. Don't play with fire.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Fire.
Awkward. I'm the awkward silence. You try to avoid me, then there I am again.
But an awkward silence can be a great thing.
Like Kelly here is about to demonstrate.
You haven't really been yourself lately. Are you okay?
Find out how you can help a friend with their mental health at seizetheawkward.org.
We're back to the Inside Scoop. Here again, your host.
Thank you so much for staying with us here on Inside Scoop as we finish up our conversation with Dr. Rochelle Thompson. Rochelle, it has been such a wonderful conversation. We're not done yet.
Okay.
But we've talked so much about DEI. During the last segment, we were talking about the Black Voice Project.
Yes.
And the many things that you're doing in DC and why it's important for us here in Fairfax County to support these projects, so we can't just stay in our little bubbles and only want to hear about what happens in Fairfax County, because what happens in DC does happen in Fairfax County. So you talked about your recent show or your recent feature on NBC4, but you also had a recent event called Spiritual Conversations.
Yes, and we actually launched the Spiritual Conversations now every single Sunday. And so we understand at the Black Voice Project that doing the work, it's not just about giving opportunity, right? That's one part of the work. It's not just about the government supporting. That's another part of the work. It's not just about mental health. That's one other part of the work. It's not just about physical health. That's one part of the work. But it's also that spiritual component that's also a part of the work. Knowing that there is something out here that is bigger than yourself is super essential into making the necessary changes to make an impact. If you can't do the spiritual work, it's going to be very difficult for you to get in alignment with whatever it is that you're trying to do in this world. Wow. And so we practice that where we have wide ranges of individuals from different backgrounds, whether it's those that are not tied to agnostic, whether it's Christian or spiritual, like dedicated. We have Islamic backgrounds as well. And we talk about those principles and how they apply to your life. We try to get you, again, in tune with something bigger than yourself. And I have to shout out to my dad and our partner that runs it. His name is Mr. Ron Lee. They are, and Mr. Ricky, they're dedicated every Sunday. Wow. And again, if it's only one person that shows up, we've changed a life. Absolutely. And so that part, I think, is more important than anything. We can fund stuff all day, but if we fund things without understanding the person's heart, mind, and body, then it could be a waste of money. And so we're helping to, again, go out in the community and meet people where they are and uplifting them. And we do that through spiritual conversations.
Yes. And humans, we're layered, right? So just taking one approach, we have to take a multi-pronged approach when it comes to answering our human issues. Or something else I was going to say, I'll come back to it. But so what can, that's what I was going to say. I like what you said about the spiritual component and focusing on something bigger than yourself. I think if you don't have that, with whatever your spiritual path may be, whatever your spiritual connection may be, you can get so overwhelmed with what you see on social media, with what you hear on the news, and that could just be something that happened down the street. And if you don't have that foundation, if you're not centered, you can get overwhelmed. You can end up doing something out of desperation. You can end up making a permanent decision over a temporary situation.
Ooh, you said it.
So I think it's so important that you all are focusing on that.
Yeah.
So what can we here in Fairfax County do to support the Black Voice Project?
Yeah, you know, it's really important because when I drove over here to Fairfax, Virginia, the air just changed. I was like, wow, this is really nice air. I like it over here, right? And so I get to drive past. I went to the 7-Eleven and I'm going past and I'm looking at some of these really nicely built homes and people are just like outside, just enjoying. Everybody's just happy, right? In certain areas where I go to DC, everyone is not that way. It's not happy. It's very on edge. The atmosphere can be a little different. There are some components that are great. And so essentially what I'd like to see from those that are in Fairfax County do is volunteer. You know, the easiest way for you to make an impact is to volunteer, and or you can donate. It's tax deductible, so there's really no loss there. But if you are committed to wanting to see change in the community that's close to you, reach out to us. You don't have to be a person of color to change the world. You don't have to be a doctor to change the world. You can be exactly who you are, but want to come and mentor to youth. You may have a business that you want to run or that you're running right now. You're an entrepreneur and you're looking for some interns. We have some youth that could do the work. We're looking for individuals like that can help our program. And so essentially, Fairfax, Virginia residents can help us in that way.
Let's go back to what you said. You said it a couple seconds ago that you don't have to be a person of color to help in these areas. What if someone says, okay, I came from a super privileged background.
Yeah.
I acknowledge that, but I want to help. How, but I don't know what to say, and I don't know all the buzzwords, and I don't want to be the bad ally that Deborah talked about earlier.
Yes.
So what do you say to that person who is living in Fairfax County, who comes from a privileged background, but they definitely want to help? What do we say to them?
We say we welcome you as you are. The same way that we meet people from other walks of life where they are, we're going to meet you where you are. And we're going to allow you that space to be who you are and make some mistakes along the way. That's essentially what DE&I is about, is that it's okay for you to make some mistakes. And so you may have that privilege, but just come being vulnerable, come being okay to be corrected, come being okay to be coached. And if you do that and then shed into the experience, just learn, just soak it in, and just understand what people are going through. That can make all of the difference, because most of the work that we do is really grounded in hearing people, listening to people, seeing them for exactly who they are beyond their flaws. And so if someone could come from a background that may be a little bit more privileged, I would give them or lend them that ear and that advice. Just come with your hands up, no sense of control, but just willing to just say, I'm all in, I'm here to listen, and whatever I can do, I'm here to help. And that's how you get the work done.
Wow. So how does DEI, because I know you have that background, how does DEI kind of juxtaposition the Black Voice Project?
Yeah, so we're rooted in advocacy. So we start looking at some of the policies, as we were talking about in our last segment with our friend in Florida. And I use that word loosely. When we're talking about that, right? Our role is to be able to uplift and educate voices, right? And so again, maybe there is a lawyer out here in Fairfax County that is licensed in Washington, D.C. that can come help us discuss how legal advocacy, how that looks for those that are experiencing legal issues. Because this isn't necessarily a race thing. Now we're talking about a money thing, a class thing, right? Where people end up being penalized because they're poor, essentially. Right? And so we want to see people come from, again, all backgrounds to come and educate us. Maybe there is a police officer who does not feel the same way, like some of our police officers we've seen on the news have recently been indicted for certain things. Maybe there are some good police officers, and I believe they are. My cousin Raymond was an MPD 25 plus years. Wow. He's an amazing police officer, upstanding values, but also meets people where they are. Maybe you have that background and you can come educate us on what's supposed to happen during a traffic stop, right? And so we advocate towards those things where we're saying, hey, look, we're hearing too many issues that some people are coming into the environment that, you know, are policing us, and they're not policing us appropriately. They're doing it in a way that's very dangerous, right? And so that's the advocacy piece of what we do. We also get to go down to the courts, and it's a really interesting place when we think of how the COVID or the pandemic came and how people were getting evicted. So we didn't really talk about, we don't talk about that. But people are still feeling the ramifications of trying to catch up on their bills from that. And so we need to advocate. We want to advocate on the behalf of those that are experiencing eviction, because people have real life issues. And in Washington, D.C., you need 3 jobs, 2 side jobs, 1 hustle in order to be able to pay rent in certain places. Right. There is a waiting list to be able to get on public housing. It's a waiting list for almost 3 to 4 years before you can get some areas where you can live. And it may not be the best area either. And then you may have credit challenges as well. So I'm super passionate about a lot of these things because I've just seen it for myself, and it's so heartbreaking where I see people who really strive. I saw a young dad, it was him and his daughter in an eviction court, and trying to, figure out what all the paperwork meant. He didn't understand the verbiage. And so we're just down there just to educate. Here's what this means. We have a lawyer on our team to be able to talk about, hey, this is how you can navigate through this, and we're going to give you some free, legal advice that you can use, and this is what you need to do. And so that's a part of the work, and I think it's really important. So anyone that has any experience in those things could come and help us out.
And so how do people get in contact with you and or the Black Voice Project?
Yes, sure. They can email. I am an email queen. You can email at info@theblackvoiceproject.com. You can also give us a call. Our number is 202-288-5130. So those are the best ways. You can follow us on social media. We're on Instagram at the Black Voice Project DMV. And you can also get in contact with me on my Instagram at Dr. R. Thompson. So those are the best ways to find me and find the crew.
And you're also on LinkedIn.
We are. I am on LinkedIn. Black Voice Project is on LinkedIn. And so it's going to be, it's my long name, Rochelle Mincy Thompson. But the Black Voice Project, you just Google, you put in LinkedIn the search, the Black Voice Project, and we'll pop up.
That is awesome. Yeah. Going back to what you were saying, before we get to my favorite part of the show, you all already know it's either or. We're going to do something a bit different. We're not going to do Would You Rather. We're going to do either or. But before we get into that, when you were talking about housing, I was raised, as I was telling you before the show started, I was raised with my grandmother, born in 1926, Jenny Woolen. It was me, my grandmother, and her youngest son. And my grades would suffer when we were struggling with housing. I knew that I was loved, and I was in a warm and caring family unit, but I felt that stress and just not knowing where I was going to sleep or if I was going to, what I was going to eat. That contributed to how I performed in school. And so sometimes we think that, young people, they just don't want to focus or they just don't want to concentrate, but everything ties together. Where you live, how you eat, what happens when you go home, all of those things are tied together. So thank you so much for what you're doing with the Black Voice Project. Thank you. So now we're going to give viewers a chance to get to know Rochelle.
Okay.
Okay, so either or, would you rather be an only child or the oldest of 12?
I'd rather be the only child. I can do bad all by myself.
Okay. Government aid or community support?
Community support all day, every day.
Okay. Who's your celebrity crush?
Ooh, oh my goodness. It would be Chadwick Boseman. That was going to be my husband. Rest in peace, God rest his soul. Wow. I love that man.
So would you have preferred him bearded or shaven?
I would have taken him any kind of way.
Okay. So, safety or opportunity?
Ooh, that's tough. Opportunity.
Opportunity. Yeah, sometimes you just got to jump and just believe it's going to work out.
Yeah, because sometimes it's a matter of not what's choosing what's best, is what's choosing what's right.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
How about follow your dreams or follow your partner?
Follow my dreams.
Okay. And here's the last one. Dinner with Jay-Z or $5,000 cash?
I'll take my check and I'll meet him at the top.
What? I'm so disappointed. Jay-Z said he'll give you $1 million a game for $9.99.
I can get it for free on YouTube. Yep.
Okay. Rochelle, thank you so much for joining us on Inside Scoop.
Thank you.
Please make sure you join us next week with our new special guest. Have a wonderful evening.